Bantam Doubleday Dell Audio Publishing presents Star Wars, The Krytos Trap, Book 3 of the X-Wing series, by Michael A. Stackpole. Commander Wedge Antilles would have preferred the ceremony to be private. Rogue Squadron had come to mourn the passing of one of their own on the week anniversary of his death. Wedge had wanted the gathering to be small and intimate, an opportunity for Corran Horn's friends to share remembrances of him, but that was not possible. Corran's death had come during the liberation of Coruscant. That made him a hero from a company of heroes. Therefore, the bureaucrats who organized the memorial service had turned it into the focal point of mourning for the entire New Republic. Corran Horn was a hero, they proclaimed loudly, but he was also a victim who represented all the victims of the Empire. The ceremony grew out of all proportion. Special grandstands had been grafted to nearby buildings. Holocams had been put into position so the ceremony could be recorded and replayed on countless worlds. Despite the very real fears about contracting the highly contagious Krytos virus, the stands were filled to overflowing. Wedge looked up from his position on the reviewing stand and out to the members of Rogue Squadron. In addition to the elite corps of pilots, Corran's other friends had come to pay tribute to him. Aayla Wasiri, a slender, brown-haired woman who had been his Corsac partner, stood next to Mirax Terek. Even though Mirax was the daughter of a notorious Corellian smuggler, she and Corran had become friends. Wedge could see she'd fallen hard for the young pilot, and the lifeless expression on her face made his heart ache. The only one who was missing is Tycho. Wedge frowned. Captain Tycho Celchu had served as Rogue Squadron's executive officer. He'd surreptitiously joined the mission to Coruscant at Wedge's request, and had been instrumental in bringing the planet's defenses down. Unfortunately, Alliance intelligence had developed evidence that Tycho was working for the Empire. Wedge had not been fully apprised of the evidence against Tycho, but he did not doubt the man's innocence for a second. In spite of the liberation, Coruscant was not a pleasant or stable world. A hideous epidemic, the Krytos virus, was ravaging the non-human population. Bacta could cure the virus, but the rebellion's entire store of the medicinal fluid was insufficient to treat everyone who suffered. This resulted in panic among aliens, and resentment against humans for their apparent immunity to the disease. A Bothan protocol subaltern waved Wedge forward, and he stepped up to the podium. He wanted to lean heavily on it. Years of fighting and saying goodbye to friends and comrades weighed him down, but he refused to give in to fatigue. His pride in the squadron and his friendship with Corran kept him upright. He looked at the crowd, then focused on the mound of granite rubble before him.
Corran Horn does not rest easy in that grave. Corran was never at ease except when he was fighting, and there is much fighting yet to be done. We have taken Coruscant, but anyone who assumes that means the Empire is dead is as mistaken as Grand Moff Tarkin was in his belief that Alderaan's destruction would cripple the rebellion. Corran Horn was not a man who gave up, no matter what the odds. More than once, he took upon himself the responsibility of dealing with a threat to the squadron and to the rebellion. Heedless of his own safety, he engaged overwhelming forces, and by sheer dint of will and spirit and courage, he won.
Wedge opened his hands to take in all those assembled at the monument.
You must do what Corran did. Fight anything and everything that would give the Empire a chance to reassert itself. If Corran Horn is ever to know peace, it will only be when we all know peace.
Down at the gravesite, an honor guard raised the squadron flag, then backed away and saluted. That signaled an end to the ceremony, and people began to drift away. A cream-furred Bothan with violet eyes crossed to where Wedge stood and nodded almost graciously. "You were quite eloquent, Commander Antilles." Borsk Phalia waved a hand toward the departing masses. "I have no doubt quite a few hearts were stirred by your words." Wedge raised an eyebrow. "But not yours, Counselor Phalia." The Bothan snorted a laugh. "If I were so easily swayed, I could be convinced to back all sorts of nonsense." "Like the trial of Tycho Celchu." Phalia's fur rippled at the back of his neck. "No, I might be convinced that such a trial was not necessary. Admiral Akbar has not persuaded you to abandon your petition to the Provisional Council about this matter?" Wedge folded his arms across his chest. "No." The Bothan's eyes narrowed. "You're moving into a realm of warfare at which I am a master commander. Your petition will fail. Captain Celchu will be tried for murder and treason." High up in a tower suite, above the surface of Imperial Center, Kirtan Lur allowed himself a smile. At this height, his only companions were hawkbats in their shadowed roosts and special intelligence operatives who were menacing despite their lack of stormtrooper armor. He felt alone and aloof. At the top of the world, he had been given all he could see to command and dominate and destroy. Before fleeing Imperial Center in the rebellion attack, Ysanne Isard had given him the job of creating and leading a Palpatine counterinsurgency front. With the PCF, he could disrupt the functioning of the New Republic. He could slow their takeover of Coruscant and hamper their ability to master the mechanisms of galactic administration. A bother, minor but vexatious, is what Isard had intended he become. Kirtan Lur knew that he had to become more. From his vantage point, he looked down on the distant blob of dignitaries and mourners gathered at the memorial for Corran Horn. While he despised them all for their politics, he joined them in mourning Horn's loss. Horn had been Lur's nemesis on Corellia, where they both served in the Corellian Security Force, or Corsec, and Lur had spent a year and a half trying to hunt him down after he fled that world. When Isard had brought Lur to Imperial Center, he had anticipated a renewal of his private little war with Horn. Horn's partner, Aayla Wasiri, was another Corsec agent Lur had hunted, and her presence on Imperial Center gave him pause. She had never been as relentless as Horn in pursuit of criminals, but that had always seemed to Lur to be because she was more thorough, and that made her more dangerous. He picked up a remote device from the table and flicked it on. A couple of small lights flashed, then a red button glowed. Lur smiled as his thumb hovered over the device for a second, but then he gently returned it to the table. Isard had pointed out on numerous occasions that only by destroying the rebellion would it be possible to reassert the Empire's authority over the galaxy. Destroying the rebellion required methods more subtle than exploding grandstands and planets, accomplishing with a vibroblade what could not be done with a Death Star. Rogue Squadron could not be allowed to die, at least not yet, because they were required for the public spectacle of Tycho Celchu's trial. General Aaron Kraken, the director of Allied intelligence, had uncovered ample evidence that pointed toward Celchu's guilt, and Lur had delighted in clearing the way for Kraken's investigators to find still more of it. The evidence would be so questionable that the members of Rogue Squadron would decry it as false. That would increase tension between the conquerors of Imperial Center and the politicians who slunk in after the pilots had risked their lives to secure the world. The Krytos virus further complicated things. Created by Evir Dericote, an Imperial scientist under Lur's supervision, it killed non-humans in a hideous manner. The victims' flesh sagged and split open while they bled from every orifice. The price of Bacta, the only remedy for the virus, had shot up, and supplies dwindled as people hoarded the medicine. Lur had taken the precaution of putting away a supply of Bacta, which he was selling off in small lots. As a result, anxious rebels were supplying the financing for an organization bent on the destruction of the New Republic. The irony of it all was sufficient to dull the omnipresent fear of discovery and capture. Now, Kirtan Lur would strike from hiding, hitting at targets chosen seemingly at random. Today he...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?